We've had recent high-profile examples of South African companies and politicians whose actions have dented their reputations. We're still wrestling with the implications of the Marikana massacre, while Discovery Invest must be thinking carefully about their guest list for next year's conference after the response to Tony Blair's attendance. Joining us on the desk is FinWeek journalist Jessica Hubbard and Dominic Heil. He's MD of the South African Reputation Institute. Welcome to you.
Thank
Dominic,
you.
I have to say, during the ad break, Dominic said we've got so much material to work with on this story. So are South African companies not good at managing reputation and putting their foot in it?
No, not at all. I think that they're just as bad as everyone else around the planet. What we are seeing overall is that the private sector is not being seen as this miracle engine of driving development forward, and therefore we're starting to have a very clear distinction about which companies have the trust of people and which ones are falling out of favor.
We had a little brainstorm before this program to think of South African companies who do not have such a good reputation, or there have been incidents in the past.
Yeah, we ran out of paper trying to write them down. But I mean, I think there are some interesting ones, and I think just this week, obviously, Discovery Invest, the Leadership Summit with Tony Blair and the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I think what I do think has come through, and I think maybe Jess will probably talk around this just now, but is the impact of social media on reputations. I mean, if you think about the Woolies and Frankie's issues earlier in the year, I mean, that was essentially driven by social media, unpopularity, the issues were driven by Facebook, Twitter, Leadership Summit. I mean, a lot of that came because people were sharing the status updates and saying, I really don't want Tony Blair talking at the Leadership Summit. So I do think that's probably one of the things that has driven a lot of the reputation issues we now see happening. And I do think, I think South African companies, probably globally as well, but South African companies are becoming particularly sensitive to criticism of their brands. And we're going through an economic climate where your customer is king. You don't get to bully them around, and I think people are becoming increasingly aware of the impact of being able to talk to industry.
God, perhaps particularly vulnerable financial services companies, and I think we just think of the global financial crisis, they're up there on the list, and then retail companies with that face, that exposure to the consumer.
Yeah, well, I think, touching on the social media issue, word of mouth has basically just taken on new dimensions. If I've seen it on Twitter, you can send a tweet and the next minute it just gets retweeted all over the place, and any bad news has the ability to literally spread like a virus. I think a lot of South African companies, we've got a whole list here of guys who just haven't managed to strike that balance between pleasing the consumer and at the same time looking out for profits.
Yes, just to pick up on Gar's point, I spoke to one MD of a PR company who said that crisis communications today, because of social media essentially puts crises on steroids. So what this means for business leaders is you have to establish a strong presence on social media before you can think of using social media to address a crisis. For example, Michael Jordan from the CEO of FNB, when the power surge happened earlier this year, Michael got onto Twitter. He actually cancelled the TV appearance with President Zuma to basically sit on Twitter all day, reassuring customers what is being done to address the crisis, when the banks will be up and running again. And it essentially increased customer loyalty after the crisis. So it was a classic example of, in every crisis there lies opportunity, and if you're prepared, you can really make that happen.
Dominic, this leads to the issue of crisis management, so after the event, and then the other element, which is probably even more important, the ongoing, humming behind the scenes managing of reputation through day-to-day events.
Absolutely, and I think that where the companies around the world are coming short is to integrate reputation management into their risk management. Most companies have sort of one line in their risk profile that says reputation risk, and they really don't know what to do with it. And to get sophisticated about this, I think will really help to develop the management systems that are required to be prepared for those kinds of events. And the thing is, about those crises, they're often misunderstood. For many companies, these crises have been defining moments to actually improve their reputation. Because in a crisis, you can see what a company is made of. And if a crisis strikes and the company and the management responds in a principled manner, and they are prepared and they know what their values are and they live by them and they demonstrate them, crises are an enormous opportunity to build one's reputation.
Sometimes it's just as simple as, I think, as owning up and saying, yes, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. I'm going to try and fix it. And I think people respond well to that.
And I think maybe the other thing is, and we're obviously cynical of PR from being journalists, but I think there was a phase where companies would simply outsource it, and it was somebody else's problem to manage our relationship. And one of the things we noticed, for instance, with Old Mutual a couple of years back was they took it in-house. Instead of reporting to a communications arm, they were then going and saying it was a direct report into the CEO. When Julian Roberts took over, essentially communications became a direct report to the CEO of the business. I want to be able to manage my reputation.
Yeah.
So I mean, maybe some comment on the externalization of reputations.
Well, certainly when there's a crisis, the CEO needs to stand there in front of the cameras and say, here I am, and this is what has happened, this is what we're going to do about it immediately, this is what we are about, and this is what you can expect from us as we go through this crisis. And as a CEO, you need to know very well when it is time for you to step up to the plate, and when you can actually say, this is an issue that is not that prominent, and I can give it to my communications department, or I can leave it with a PR company. But whenever you start to hit the headlines, the CEO needs to stand there and be accountable.
I just want to jump in on that. I like doing that. But I think just to touch on Dominic's point, the ABSA retrenchment is a perfect example of that. They went on this retrenchment program, denied that it was retrenchment. Then people got given boxes and marched out the building, and they put the HR director, in front of the media, and the CEO and the comms team was nowhere to be seen, and I think it blew up in their faces quite horribly. So yeah, I think it's a perfect example.
Yes, to add to Garth's point, what ABSA did terribly wrong there was they tried to put lipstick on a pig, is what we'd call it. And you need to be honest. I think honesty is key, and the honesty does need to come from the very top. Often boards tend to ignore reputation management because for listed companies, share price is often a measure of intellectual and reputational capital. So boards need to take that into account and regard reputation management as part of their fiduciary duties, and it's a business consideration that needs to be given the utmost of importance.
So we've spoken about honesty, and Garth also mentioned that as a criterion. If you had to be practical about this, Dominic, what would be the top 5 items that a company, if you think of some of your viewers might be smaller companies, what should they bear in mind?
Well, I think that you need to be really clear about what the expectations are out there on the one side, and then you need to be really clear about what you as a company stand for. And so it's really critical that you have thought about this up front, because if a crisis hits, you don't have time to think about this anymore. And in a time of crisis, the public will test what you're made of. And even if you have to do retrenchments, everyone knows that in management you have to make tough decisions. And sometimes they're hard decisions, and sometimes people suffer for it. But people will see what you're made of if you explain why you're doing it. Then people will even understand retrenchments. You can go out there and say, there are certain business imperatives, this was the logic, and this is what we're going to do to make this bearable for the people who have to go.
It sounds as though leadership really is fundamental to reputation management. Good, strong leadership, knowing who you are, assertiveness, identity, and being consistent and credible in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you cannot be a leader if you don't have a good reputation, because people will just simply not follow you. So if you think that reputation is something that you can simply outsource to the communications people, you're gravely mistaken. You're actually not doing your job either as a CEO or as the board. And King 3 says that reputation is the responsibility of the board. As a matter of fact, it is the key responsibility of the board, not the supervision, is to protect the reputation. And you can only do that if you build fundamentally ethical companies.
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to jump in and say, I think it's very interesting to look at the way businesses have been made up. I mean, the last couple of years have been hellishly difficult. There have been a lot of retrenchments. There's been a lot of pressure. Guys start cutting corners when your costs are under pressure. You really, the ethos of your business gets tested. And I think that when your leaders lead and they give the example of these are the values we should be doing, and it should then have this knockdown effect. It shouldn't be our PR department does a once a year shindig and we all get up and we say these are our values and this is what we're excited about, and then we forget it for the next 364 days of the year. Like, values have to resonate not just from one person or from a bunny in the marketing department, but from actually a whole. It's got to live it through the entire organization. Not everybody likes to jump up and down and swing pom poms, etc. But if you need to understand the value of your business, and I think that is why you see businesses, the Googles, the Apples, they've got this ethos within their businesses that people really admire. I mean, again, F&B is probably another good example of it. But that is where you've got to be able to communicate those values all the way down through the organization.
Dominic, are you comfortable listing who the South African companies are that do this well, who have strong, healthy reputations?
Well, we have one company that's doing really well, and that's Woolworths. And we know why in our research, we know very well why they're doing so well. And that is because they have been able to integrate their business into that sphere of influence that they operate in. They have convinced us that they really look after the communities that they operate with, that they look after their suppliers, that they really do understand what effect their business has on other businesses, on society at large. And they have fulfilled that space with vision and leadership.
I don't know if I can jump in there very, very quickly, but to the Woolworths point, I mean, they took a lot of flack around the Frankie's example, and I mean, as a media house, you expect a real kickback when you poke a stick at them. And to their credit, when we were running satirical cartoons about their leadership and Frankie's knocking them out and all of that, to their credit, they came back, they laughed at themselves, they said, okay, we've heard public opinion and we've responded to it. And I think that it did surprise me a bit when they engaged the media, they engaged the stakeholders, they explained about some of the projects that they did beyond what you assume are just the soft and fluffy CSI things. So to their credit, that is one of the examples where leadership has come through for an organisation.
Yes. Briefly, Dominic, if we can close off, if you could tell us, is there a correlation, perhaps a tenuous and a long-term one, a correlation between good reputation and good financial performance of a company?
Absolutely. We have established that if you look at the top companies, if you look at the companies that we survey on an ongoing basis, those who have stronger reputations over time appreciate and are worth more. It's a very good investment strategy to look at who are the companies that have good reputation, because in all likelihood they will be the ones who will outperform the market in the future.